press of the hand of time. Just like the ones who've gone before us, we feel the fate of the next in line. You fight the power of one with the power of many. You've got to fight weakness with the power of might. You fight wrong with the power of justice. Fight darkness with light.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a diversified media enterprises production.
For WIN, I'm Joanne Powers. Home health care workers have filed a class action lawsuit against the state of Illinois, demanding the administration of Republican Governor Bruce Rauner pay them a 48-cent per hour raise that state legislators included in the recent state budget. These home care providers, primarily women of color, care for people with disabilities for an average hourly wage of $13 an hour, mostly for jobs far less than 40 hours a week. SEIU Healthcare Illinois Communications Director James Mohammed.
Governor Rauner is obligated to pay the 48-cent raise. These workers do a lot of hard work and save the state a lot of money. We don't understand what the governor's resistance to this is. As a matter of fact, we feel that he should come to the bargaining table ready to offer a little more in light of what these workers save for the state and what they do for the people they care for.
Ironically, the Rauner administration is claiming that the raise needs to be negotiated as part of the workers' collective bargaining agreement.
We've been in bargaining for 2 years. They've offered no real proposals that really allow workers a path forward. We've come to the table time after time, ready to make some progress on the negotiations. However, time after time, they tend to come either unprepared or unprepared to do anything. We contend that it's part of the state budget. It should be paid. That's why we filed the lawsuit.
Collective worker action has led to a victory for non-unionized workers at a Target store in Christiansburg, Virginia. After years of trying to have General Manager Daniel Butler removed through official channels for sexual harassment and racist remarks, a small group of workers mounted a 5-day strike at the end of August, presenting testimony to the corporation and the public to hold Butler accountable. On Friday, they received word that Butler had been fired. Adam, a Target worker and member of the Independent Workers Committee at the store, says this doesn't end with Butler, as they are still fighting for improved working conditions, such as a living wage and health coverage.
We wanted to show through this to the other coworkers that you can exercise your labor rights, you can go on strike and still retain your job and not get fired. In the lead up to this, we talked to workers a lot, trying to get them more involved, and a lot of the common responses was just this fear that they would get fired if they participated in this. Concerted activity is protected whether you're in a union or not to take collective action around given issues. We don't need official recognition. I think we showed even with very small amount of numbers, you actually can have a significant impact if you're well organized and have a good strategy.
Workers Independent News is America's multimedia voice for workers.
We need to make more money. What they're paying us, a greedy corporation, they just want to pay us what they want to pay us, and it's not right.
Support WIN's news mission at workersindependentnews.com. WIN is made possible in part by the OPEIU, the Office and Professional Employees International Union. You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit workersindependentnews.com.
It's time for the Rick Smith Show.
I want you to get up now. I want all of you to get up out of your chairs. I want you to get up right now and go to the window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, "I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore!"
I don't want to abolish government. I simply want to reduce it to the size where I could drag it into the bathroom and drown in the bathtub.
You bet I cut the taxes at the top.
How dare you? How dare you? Go ahead, make my day.
The Rick Smith Show starts now.
Alright.
Brothers, sisters, working class heroes, this is The Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. It is September 11th, and it's one of those days that everyone knows where they were on this day back in 2001. It's one of those moments in history that, regardless of what's going on, this is the day you look back and you remember. The idea that we'll never forget, the idea that we'll never leave. And I remember where I was as the planes hit the towers. I was at the Cleveland Clinic with my grandmother. She was having knee replacement surgery. And I remember the chaos, that feeling, that this surreal feeling that this can't really be happening. And then the hope that this was just an accident. When the first one hit, it was the hope that, this was just an accident. It was, something went terribly awry, even though in the pit of your stomach you knew something terrible, something horribly wrong is going on. And this is the day that changed this country forever. And, there are only a few moments in history like this to where you look at it and you go, this is when the world changed. Pearl Harbor being another one of those moments. When you're in the post-Pearl Harbor, post-9/11 world, you look back to the day before and you go, I pine for September 10th. The country that we were, the sense of security that we had, and the privacy, the idea that not everything was going to be videotaped, not everything was on camera. And I was having this conversation within like the last week or so about when growing up as a kid, not everything you did as a kid was subject to videotaping. Not every time you walked across a lawn, not every time you cut through a field, not every time you went, and had a couple of beers with your friends, did it become part of an incident. We now live in an era where cameras are everywhere because we want that illusion of safety and security. And I'll be honest, I think back and I go, I want that for my kids. I want them to feel safe, and to feel safe from their government. Sadly, what's going on in this country, and really 9/11 accelerated it, is all of this collection of data, all of this collection of information, all of this control, phones being tapped, data being collected in huge mining centers, just the amazing amount of intrusion under the guise that it's going to keep us safe. And honestly, look, the amazing thing in this country, and you got to be very honest about it, is that there hasn't been another large-scale attack like that. It's been 16 years, and there hasn't been one like that. I'm sure there have been thousands of people who have tried, but there hasn't been one like that. And, you got to question, is it the security world we live in? Because there was always that phrase, I can keep you safe from everybody else, but who's going to keep you safe from us? And I wonder. And while you're looking at all of the disasters that are happening around us, and look, this past weekend was all hurricane all the time. And I got to be honest, I think Trump and the Republicans have got to be thrilled. They couldn't be happier because, look, the focus has been on the disasters, and rightly so. But sadly, in my view, what it's shown also is how unprepared we are. How unprepared we are in this country to care for the poor, the downtrodden, the elderly, the incapacitated. And here's the thing. The reality is these disasters, they're not going to stop. And yes, while we've had disasters in the past, and I can't tell you how many people have said, we had big storms back then. Yeah, we had really ugly ones. Really, we did. They were nasty. I remember some of them. What we know is that these storms are going to get bigger, and they're going to become more frequent. And this means more evacuations, and also this means more opportunities to get it right. No one should be left in harm's way during one of these disasters. No one. And yet you look at what's going on down in South Florida as Irma, slammed into southern Florida, is now downgraded to a tropical storm. It's no longer a hurricane. But you look at those people who were left, good luck. You couldn't get out by yourself. Sorry. I'm sure churches ran, their buses out and people tried. But there was no, in my view and what I've seen and what I've read from people on Twitter, there was no mass evacuations. Why isn't there, if we're going to have these kind of things, why aren't there big trains carrying people out? Why aren't there huge convoys of people going, hey, load up, let's go, let's get out? And I know moving 1 million people is a massive undertaking, but we're really not talking about, everyone. We're talking about the people who can't afford it. And poverty shouldn't be one of those things that makes you have to withstand one of these storms. So I look at, the world that we're in, and, there are opportunities for all of us to kind of come together, united, and remember these horrible tragedies like 9/11. Remember these horrible storms, but prepare for the future. Just kind of a thought. It's one of those things that was, just banging around in my head over this weekend. That, as I was thinking about 9/11 and the horrible changes that have happened, the Patriot Act and all of the intrusions into liberty or personal privacy. It just makes you kind of stop and think. Makes you kind of, I guess, pine for the old days. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com, or give us a call, 1-888-520-RICK. Where were you on 9/11? What were you doing that day? I'd like to hear it. Quick break, right back with our good friend Propane Jane. Stick around. You listen to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Good job.
There's order in the house. There's a flaw in the system. And the fly in the ointment is going to bring the whole thing down. Floodgates are open. We've let the demons loose. The big guns have spoken. And we've fallen for the ruse.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1851. That was the day that a Maryland planter named Edward Gorsuch was killed in Christiana, Pennsylvania. Gorsuch had come to Pennsylvania to try and recapture 3 black men that had escaped from slavery on his farm outside of Baltimore 2 years earlier. A year after the men escaped, Congress passed the Fugitive Slave Act. This penalized helping those who had escaped slavery with a $1,000 fine and up to 6 months in jail. Emboldened by the law, slave catchers chased those who had made the journey to freedom in the North. Gorsuch received news that the men he was looking for were in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. 2 of the escaped slaves were at the farm of William Parker, a black man who had also escaped slavery in Maryland. Located just north of the Mason-Dixon line, Lancaster had a well-established underground railroad network. An armed black self-defense group had developed to stand against the slave catchers. Gorsuch and his son gathered a group of men and headed north. At the Parker farm, they were confronted by a group of at least 50 black men armed with guns and pitchforks. Gorsuch refused to leave, and a gun battle erupted. Gorsuch was shot and killed in the exchange of fire. Parker, his family, and the 3 formerly enslaved men fled to Canada. 38 others who were there that day were charged with treason for taking part in the confrontation. This included Castor Hanway, a white man who had tried to defuse the standoff. None of the charged were ever convicted. In the South, slave owners were outraged that no one was punished. Tensions between the North and South sharpened. As a result, the country moved closer to the Civil War, the bloody conflict that finally ended slave labor. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter @laborhistoryin2.
Chances are, when you took a shower this morning, an AFSCME member made sure that water was clean. When you drove to work, an AFSCME member maintained the road. When you rode an elevator, an AFSCME member inspected it. I'm David Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. AFSCME members enforce regulations, keep prisoners behind bars, take care of patients, protect the environment, and more. The work isn't glamorous, the salaries aren't high, but AFSCME members serve the public in every aspect of our daily lives. Chances are, you'll never see that AFSCME member working in a sewage plant, diving underwater to repair a bridge, or answering a 911 call. But aren't you glad they do? For more information, visit AFSCME13.org. We are AFSCME. We make Pennsylvania happen!
Sanity for a change. The Rick Smith Show.
I've been knocking on the door that holds the throne. I've been looking for the map that leads me home. I've been stumbling on good hearts turned to stone. The road of good intentions is gone dry as a bone. We take care of our own.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So as we're seeing reports across the Caribbean islands of violence erupting, because guess what? There's no food. There's no water. Everything has been washed away, and what you've got left are desperate people who are in desperate need of assistance. And the sad reality is, these, in my view, it's not just going to be poverty-stricken areas in the future who are going to be in this kind of a situation. Right here in the U.S., I fear that this is our reality as these storms get bigger, more frequent, and, well, worse. Anyway, here to talk to us a little bit about what Harvey dumped on Texas. Our good friend Propane Jane is back. Jane, thanks for taking time for us.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me back.
So first question, how are you guys doing? How are you doing after the storm?
Well, we're doing well. Just speaking for my household individually, miraculously, our house is high and dry, and we were really blessed and fortunate to be faring pretty well so far. And, the city of Houston is resilient. We're strong, and things are eventually, slowly but surely, getting back to normal.
How bad was it during the height?
It was pretty bad. I mean, as background, I'm a native Houstonian. I've lived here all my life. I'll be 36 in October. So I've seen my fair share of storms come through the city. Where I live is about 30 miles southwest of Houston proper. And, we tend to fare pretty well in storms. We don't live in, what's considered to be a traditional, floodplain. And so even though the storms have come and gone, we've gotten out mostly with, some flash flooding and maybe some high water areas, but nowhere near the level of devastation that is just all over the city. I mean, in places that have never flooded before, they're completely underwater. So in terms of just change and the dynamics of what this storm brought to the city compared to what we've seen in the past, I mean, there's no comparison. And, I'm just in awe. I mean, it's very surreal. For example, on my street, we didn't get any water in our house, but we're one of only two families that didn't get water in our house. The rest of the street has had to pull up their whole, all of their floors on the first level of their house.
Wow.
And when, as you drive out of my neighborhood, still today, September 11th, I can't even keep track of time. I can't even tell you how long it's been since it hit, but there's still belongings piled up on the sidewalk, as we drive out of our neighborhood. So
wow. That was the one thing we had gone down after Hurricane Katrina, like several months later, and there were still piles of people's stuff and still piles of debris that hadn't been, and this we're talking like 10 months later, that hadn't been taken away because there was just so much.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's so bizarre about it is that, you can be, 10 minutes away. I mean, for instance, we were on mandatory evacuation from our house because we live pretty close to a major levee for this area, and we also live pretty close to a creek system that flows out into the Brazos River, which, was overflowing. And so the streets basically just couldn't contend with all the water. So we were on mandatory evacuation for 6 days, and we were at my parents' house, and they lived just 11 minutes away. And their streets were completely dry. And so just, you can be in certain areas of town and it looks totally normal. It looks like nothing happened. And you just drive a few blocks over and it's a complete disaster area.
Yeah. Again, going back to Hurricane Katrina while we were there, it's the same dynamic. The poor, just in the poor areas that were, at lower elevations, they were devastated. The wealthier areas appeared fairly unscathed.
Yeah. And I think that's what's so interesting about these storms in particular, and I think for the Houston area, and if you don't live in Houston, if you've never been to Houston, or even just the state of Texas, actually, it's hard to really appreciate how widespread our communities are, and how far from the major metropolitan area our development is. And so in this storm in particular, I think it really highlights how, it isn't really class-based. I mean, there are neighborhoods here in Houston that are $1 million homes that are flooded out. And so everyone was affected. Certainly, their ability to recover is going to be different based on what their means are. But in terms of who bore the brunt of the catastrophe, it really is all of us. Harvey didn't discriminate. And, I think that's one of the things that's unfortunate about how we cover these disasters and these storms. If you take Trump, for example, among other, insults that occurred when he came to Houston, he visited the shelters and he made it a very significant point to, make sure that he picked up children of color. And as a Houstonian, as someone who lives in, a very affluent suburb, who's seeing people of all walks of life who are affected by this storm, in particular white people that voted for Trump,
right?
That live out in the suburbs, who were affected by this, who while he's there at the shelter, are trying to dig, mud out of their homes, or trying to get sewage out of their homes. And so, I think that that's going to be interesting as well in Florida. All of these affluent people who live on the coast, who have all of these properties, these boats, they're going to be affected in the same way.
Yeah, but here's the difference, and you alluded to this a moment ago. The difference is I don't think there were very many affluent people living in those shelters at that moment. I think most of those folks had the resources to get out. And these storms, while as you've pointed out, didn't discriminate based on class, your ability to prepare and recover really is about class.
It absolutely is, and I think again, what's again so interesting about this flood is that something like 90% of the people affected don't have flood insurance, and so again, these are areas that traditionally do not flood, and even in places that do flood, a lot of people still don't make that investment to have flood insurance, and so this is something that costs thousands upon thousands of dollars, to rip out basically the guts of your home and start over again. And so this is why, at last count that I saw, last week, I've lost track of it now, it was about 500,000 people had registered for FEMA assistance, for Harvey in particular. And so there are people who are applying for federal assistance who maybe have never, requested government assistance for anything in their entire life.
Right.
But when you start looking at, $10,000, $15,000, $20,000, $40,000, $50,000, a lot of people, that's gonna break them. They may be able to sort of get by and live a middle class life, but when you add such an expense, kind of like a healthcare expense, something like that, it can really change their financial circumstances.
Yeah, and then there are going to be those who, well, we won't replace the floor, and you'll have mold underneath it, and then
right.
you end up with sick kids and sick family members, and there's nothing good in this scenario. Really not.
Yeah, and I mean, again, what I just keep going back to, and have been, even in the midst of this storm, is what is our government response going to be? How do we navigate this situation when we have people in government who don't necessarily think government is supposed to do anything useful for the people?
Exactly. So let me ask you that then, because it was one of the questions I wanted to get to is, the president did go down there, and I said from the beginning, I don't think he should have gone. He should have stayed away. Send the resources, send the messaging. If he wanted to show up, get some work boots on, and do a much better job loading the truck than just putting 5 boxes in the back of a truck.
Right.
But I'm curious, you being there, what was the sense of his coming? Did you want him there? Was that a good thing? What do you think?
I tweeted that same day. I'm still on mandatory evacuation from my home. Ask me how much I care. I didn't use that word. I actually used an expletive. But ask me how much I care that he's here in the city of Houston. Because at that point, I was still trying to figure out, is my house underwater? Am I going to be able to get my kids back into the neighborhood safely? When is school going to start? All of these things that when you're still in the midst of the crisis. And I think that's kind of what is getting lost in this is that, yes, the eye of the storm may not be on top of us anymore, but we're still in a crisis. And so coming into this environment in the midst of that, either you need to be doing it to say, okay, I'm here to, see the devastation. I'm here to see how we can make the appropriate federal response to this, or I'm here to demonstrate volunteerism. I'm here to go into someone's house and actually show to the American people what people are contending with. I'm going to actually sit down and talk to somebody who's living in this shelter and try to understand how we're going to get housing for 40,000 people who are displaced now. And so it's that side of it in terms of him just not even really connecting the visit to a legislative agenda, but also the fact that he was insulting. I mean, he made very flippant remarks. He signed the wall in the NRG shelter. He was still a sociopath in the midst of a crisis.
Yeah, it was all about him, wasn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And so I think that is very much how it was seen by at least the people that I communicated with here, on the ground, who just sort of feel like, rolling their eyes, like, I have too much going on to pay attention to whatever he's doing right now to get attention. And whatever he's doing is a distraction from what I'm actually trying to do to dig myself out of this.
Right.
But I think also just, from just kind of a cost standpoint, I think I'm personally insulted by it because these are the same people who are telling us that we're not going to have the money to fund disaster relief, but yet they're going to spend millions of dollars and even now, I mean, a lot of my patients that I have who moved here from Katrina still talk about what the emotional toll of those initial, months when they didn't have housing and they were living in a shelter, what that was like for them. And there's a lot of PTSD and anxiety that is still associated with that. So I think for him to be focusing on, like, hey, there's all these people here, like it's his rally or something, and not really understanding the significance of what that means for so many people to be housed in that situation and how important it is to get them out of there as soon as possible. He's just missing it. He's missing the forest for the trees.
It kind of reminded me when Barbara Bush went to Houston, when the Katrina people from Katrina were leaving Louisiana. And she said, well, they look very comfortable. They're just happy to be here. And it was really one of those very tone-deaf moments where you're going, really, Barbara?
Yeah. And I think what's so interesting is how things have changed, right? I mean, in terms of the ex-presidents and the effort that George H.W. Bush and George W. Bush are putting together, with Bill Clinton and President Obama, just in terms of, understanding what is actually going on when it hits your own backyard. I think for a lot of these people, in particular the Bushes, when you juxtapose, what happened with Katrina and their response now that it's in Texas, and certainly we want to be thankful and grateful that people are helping. But I think, one thing that is so important and that we're seeing in the politics of this is that, people like Ted Cruz or somebody like Marco Rubio, they feel a certain way about something when it's happening to other people and it's not their state. And then all of a sudden they take this new position, when it's affecting their constituents.
So what you're saying is, the people who voted against the Sandy money or tried to break up the Sandy money, now saying, hey, bring it to our state. So the other question is that, do you have any respect for the 90 who voted against the money for Houston, based on, hey, screw those people?
Yeah, I have no respect for them, including the 4 Texans who voted against the relief. And I think that this is going to be sincerely a come to Jesus moment for these people, because there are the congressional Republicans that still want to do this, small government. They don't want to spend any federal dollars on this, and they gladly are saying, hey, do states' rights, and y'all take care of your own situation. Which maybe would make some sense if all of these states weren't red states that are mismanaged, that don't have the money they're supposed to have, and that are also going to be stingy. Again, if you look at Texas and Greg Abbott, we allegedly, and I say allegedly very strongly, have a $10 billion rainy day fund. We've now had the rainiest day ever. We got 50 inches of rain, rainiest days ever. And they're not talking about tapping that fund. We don't even know if the money's there. And so I do think that, the state Republican Party wants the federal government to chip in now all of a sudden. And they're up against a federal government that wants the state to take a crack at it.
Isn't it amazing how that ideology kind of plays itself against one another?
Yeah,
and I would argue that they win. That they win regardless. It's one of those heads I win, tails you lose kind of scenarios, because they just pit one against the other, and gridlock is victory for them because they can say, look, government doesn't work.
Yeah, and again, I think that this is a very interesting moment again because they have all 3 branches of government, and they have crises that are affecting Republican-controlled, quote-unquote, states. And unfortunately, it's not going to just be let them handle their mess, because what's happening in these states in particular is going to affect the rest of the country. When you talk about oil and gas and you talk about these refineries that are in the Gulf and how much they supply to the rest of the country, look at Florida, their crops. Billions of dollars of crops that the rest of the country, how's the rest of the country going to feel if suddenly oranges or orange juice is $15?
Yeah, well, gas shot up in our neighborhood, what, 45 cents a gallon?
Yeah.
50 cents a gallon?
So again, I think that the Republican Party would love to just sort of throw their hands up and go, government doesn't work. See, we told you so. But there is going to come a time, and in particular right now, where people are looking to them for answers and solutions, because if they don't have answers and solutions, the result is going to be disastrous. Like you were saying in the intro, I mean, this is a disaster. People's lives are on the line, and when that happens, when people are hungry, when they don't have food, when they don't have, you know, the basic resources they need to survive, they get desperate, and that is where government is supposed to play a role. And unfortunately, you know, they're just asleep at the wheel.
Yeah. So let me ask you last line of questioning then, because look, these 1,000-year storms and 500-year storms and 100-year storms, they seem to be coming much quicker.
Yeah.
Maybe my math, maybe my calendar's off. I don't know. But we seem to be having these historic storms for one reason or another. And you can surmise whatever you want. Is it climate change? Is it the angry God who's just ticked off because who knows what today? But the reality is I don't think they're going away.
Yeah, they're not.
So what do we do, you know, to start planning for, you know, setting up a system of, you know, maybe thinking, you know, down the road, how do we evacuate people from large metropolitan cities like Miami or Houston? How do we make sure that people get shelter and food to be able to weather the storm and then to be able to rebuild? At least, you know, it's kind of my thought.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I agree with you. And what I will say is that ultimately, you know, humans are resilient, and we do have the capacity to evolve and to adapt. And again, you know, being someone who's lived in an area that is prone to storms, tropical storms, hurricanes, etc., I've seen my community make adjustments. I've seen the city of Houston make adjustments to withstand whatever comes in the future. Just to give you an example, when Tropical Storm Allison hit Houston, I believe that was 2002. I could be wrong about that. But basically, the entire Texas Medical Center that's here in Houston took on water. The research community lost decades and decades of scientific research. So many animals, research animals, died and perished in that flooding. And so in response to that, the city obviously, you know, collected more tax revenue and put, you know, and recognized, hey, this medical center is one of the best things we have. It's great for the Houston economy, and it's great for the world, what we're doing here for medicine. And they made the investment. And so in this storm, in Harvey in particular, the way the Texas Medical Center withstood the flooding is amazing. I mean, no animals were lost, no research was lost. They have a whole underground storm system where they shut it down when it floods so water doesn't get down there. And that happened, you know, in a span of, you know, less than 20 years. So there certainly are things that we can do, but we have to have, you know, people who want to do it, who understand that there's a problem that is afoot, and that we have to be better prepared for it, you know, in terms of, you know, evacuation. You know, wouldn't a high-speed rail be nice? If instead of putting all these people on the highways in all these individual vehicles, if we could get them on a high-speed rail and get them, you know, evacuated away from the storm, how fast could we do that?
Yep.
If we told, you know, if we had a policy where employers could let people off of work soon enough to evacuate safely, you know, because that's one thing that gets lost in this. People always say, well, why didn't you leave earlier? Well, some people, their jobs won't let them leave. They're not going to get paid.
Yep.
And so what can we do in terms of how we treat people and from a policy standpoint, so they can make safer decisions for themselves? But again, I think all of it still boils down to understanding that there is a role of government in this situation, and understanding that we can make investments in our infrastructure, and we can reduce our dependence on fossil fuels, so that, you know, so that we're not contributing. But again, I just think people have to have some basic acceptance of the phenomenon of man-made climate change.
I'm with you. And at the end of the day, out of these tragedies, there's the chance for opportunity to make sure that the future, well, we don't do these. I mean, I look at countries like the Netherlands who are almost completely underwater, and yet, you know, they've figured out how to deal with it.
Yeah.
You know, Jane, I wish you the best. I'm glad you're safe and well and your family's well. But I wish you the best going forward.
Thank you. And to everybody listening out there, I really appreciate all of the love and support and prayers that came my way, because that definitely helped us get through it. So I appreciate it.
Good stuff. Jane, thanks so much. Look forward to talking to you again next week.
You too. Have a great week.
Good stuff. Let's take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show for working people.
We're on a road to nowhere. We're on a road to nowhere. We're on a road to nowhere.
Bringing sanity and rational thought back to America. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. Today in Labor History, we pause to remember the events that took place on the morning of September 11th. The year was 2001. Terrorists hijacked planes and intentionally crashed them into the Twin Towers in New York City and the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. Nearly 3,000 people were killed in the attack, including 634 union members. They were members of the fire and police unions that had responded to help those at the scene of the attack. They were also pilots and flight attendants on the crashed planes. 343 firefighters died on that day. It was the deadliest firefighter disaster in U.S. history. Before September 11th, the greatest loss of firefighters in an urban building collapse fire occurred in Chicago in 1910. 21 firefighters were killed while fighting a fire in the stockyards. 11 years after the September 11th attack, Harold Schattenberger of the International Association of Firefighters recalled their sacrifice. At the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, our members gave everything they had. The best that this union and this nation have to offer was demonstrated in their courageous response. In the aftermath of September 11th, the Firefighters Union worked to improve benefits and protections for their members and their families. In particular, the Uniformed Firefighters Association Local 94 and Uniformed Fire Officers Association Local 854 lobbied Washington officials on these issues. In 2010, President Barack Obama signed the James Zagrota 9/11 Health and Compensation Act into law. The act was named after a police officer who developed a fatal respiratory disease while working at recovery efforts at Ground Zero. The act provided medical monitoring and treatment to World Trade Center responders. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
Donald Trump loves it when crowds at his raucous right-wing rallies stand and chant in red-faced fury, "Build that wall! Build that wall!" So he keeps fanning their fire by repeatedly promising to wall off Mexico with a multi-billion-dollar, quote, "big, beautiful barrier on the border." "We must have the wall," he tweeted in late August, promising again that, quote, "Mexico will pay for it." The problem with his bombastic promises, however, is that they turn out to be duds. Even Trump knows that building that wall is nothing but PR Trumpery. In a phone call to President Peña Nieto, he admitted that Mexico actually was not going to pay a single peso for the offensive border partition, but he begged his cross-border counterpart to stop saying so publicly, for Mexico's adamant refusal to pay was exposing Trump, the deal-maker, as a weakling. Still, he loudly threatened again on August 21st to close down our government if Congress doesn't pony up billions to fund his pet project. But just 4 days later, reality intervened when a mass migration poured across the U.S. border. Not a migration of Mexicans, but of floodwaters from the Gulf of Mexico. Hurricane Harvey's biblical level of destruction not only swamped cities and communities all along the Texas-Louisiana coastline, but it has also swamped Congress with a tsunami of demands from GOP state officials for as much as $180 billion in federal relief, not counting Hurricane Irma. This is Jim Hightower saying, ironically, Trump and his gang of anti-big government congressional zealots were about to cut nearly $1 billion from the federal disaster aid budget when Harvey hit the coast. Now, they're scrambling to add multiple billions of dollars to that budget just to rebuild what Harvey destroyed. Where to get the money? Start by zeroing out every dime that would be frittered away on Donald's folly.
Hightower's commentaries are brought to you by the Hightower Lowdown, the monthly newsletter with Hightower's take on what Wall Street and Washington are up to. For information, visit hightowerlowdown.org.
The most important issues of the day. This is The Rick Smith Show.
North Dakota crowned Miss America, the first time in the 96-year history of the Miss America pageant that someone from the state of North Dakota has been crowned Miss America. The 23-year-old graduate of Brown University, in the questioning portion, she was asked about whether it was a bad decision for the Trump administration to pull out of the Paris Climate Accord. She said, yes, it was a bad idea. Everyone basically knows that what is going on is real and that we're not prepared. And I don't know if that's what won her the crown, but at least it shows she's no dummy. Well, look, she graduated from Brown University. There you go. Anyway, let's find out what's going on around the world. In Washington, D.C., Victoria Jones, Talk Media News. Victoria, thanks for taking time for us.
Thank you. But did you check out Miss Texas?
No. I don't watch those things.
Not looks-wise.
I don't watch those things.
No, I mean what she said.
No, what did she said?
Oh, let me find it for you. Oh, I have to find it for you. I have to find this for you.
I can't. You've built this up now. I can't wait.
Well, now I've got to find it. Now I'm going to have to talk amongst myself.
Well, some of the most intelligent conversation comes about that way.
It does. Okay, so let's keep going while I talk amongst myself and find it for you.
Irma's now a Category 1, now down to a tropical storm.
Yes, but that's 70 miles an hour winds, and that is still very serious and causing misery.
Yeah, I mean, you look down there, tons of misery. Oh
yeah, because it's the flooding still coming, and and it's this is very serious stuff. I mean, this is not to be messed with.
There's going to be a lot of cleaning up here, and I guess look, there's a lot of good disaster capitalism. We're going to rebuild it for the next, and we're going to rebuild it in a shoddy way so that the next time it comes through, we can rebuild it again.
But I don't think it was built quite as shoddily as Houston was it?
No, because who was expecting, that kind of a massive storm? I mean, they get storms, but, not like Florida does. I mean, Florida's hit almost every year. I mean, did nobody learn the tale of the three pigs?
What, huff and puff and blow your house down?
Yes, you don't. Why are there trailer parks in Florida?
Well, I think that's a very good point. But there are. And then the other thing is, where are all the migrants, living? They are living in unbelievably poor conditions.
Horrible. Yeah,
horrible conditions.
But you know what? Our media doesn't really care much about them.
No.
And look, and Trump's trying to throw them out anyway, so there is that.
Well, yes. Here we are. I found Miss Texas for you.
Oh, please. You've built this up so much that it's got to be a gold mine.
Miss Texas. Okay. Well, this may not be what you think. Okay, Miss Texas, who is got big blonde hair, shoulder-length hair.
All right. Never mind.
Last month, a demonstration of neo-Nazis, white supremacists, and the KKK in Charlottesville turned violent, and a counter-protester was killed. The president said there was shared blame with very fine people on both sides. Were there? Tell me, yes or no, and explain. Miss Texas. She formulated her response quickly and seemed to gain even more confidence as she went on. She said, I think that the white supremacist issue, it was very obvious that it was a terrorist attack, and I think that President Donald Trump should have made a statement earlier addressing the fact and making sure that all Americans feel safe in this country. That is the number one issue right now.
Wow.
Yeah. You didn't expect that, did you?
I did not.
Yeah.
I expected her to pull out her gun and shoot all the people on the panel.
Yeah.
Don't ask me such. But here's the other part of this. Why do we ask these kind of questions of people who, all we really want to see them is walking around in bathing suits?
Well, that's what you want to see.
Oh, come on.
Let's ask your producer.
I don't think she watches them either. But really, do we really care what
I like to see the ball gown.
Of course you do. Everyone's got their reason, and it's got nothing to do with what's between their ears.
No, it hasn't. I like seeing the dresses.
Yeah, of course, and and whatever the talent that they
No, I'm not interested in the talent. It's very boring.
Yeah, well, okay, well, but I mean, can't
and
we
they
just
work
go
very hard at it, and I don't care what to see the dresses.
All right, well, then there is that, but I mean, at the end of this, do I really care what? Not really. I mean, there was a good answer by her, though. Good for her.
These are very. I have a friend whose daughter went into Miss Teen Maryland.
Yeah.
My God, and she's very bright, honest student. My God, did she work at it? I can't tell you how hard you have to work at this thing.
It's a total family commitment, but
the extra credits and the academics and it's unbelievable, the skill.
Yeah, I mean, good for them. I mean, I wouldn't do it. Although I don't look all that great in a bathing suit or an evening gown.
Can we move on?
Absolutely. Please do.
Okay, what would you like to talk about next?
Today's 9/11. The Trump folks are going to have their first commemoration. What's, I guess, a new memorial?
Well, there's two things. President Trump did have his first commemoration. There was a moment of silence at the White House. Then he attended an event at the Pentagon that was hosted obviously by the Secretary of Defense and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and the President gave remarks. So that happened. But separately, there is a new 9/11 memorial for first responders who died of 9/11 illnesses. And it is being dedicated today, and it's on Long Island at Hempstead.
Right.
It's very interesting. There are going to be two plaques. It is a monument built by the town of Hempstead near the Atlantic Ocean on Long Island's South Shore. It's featuring a twisted 30-foot tall beam of Trade Center steel, an elevated walkway, and a granite plaque engraved with the names of the nearly 3,000 people who died in the attacks. Then there's a separate plaque with the names of 582 police officers, construction workers, cleanup volunteers, firefighters, and others who spent time in the rubble of the World Trade Center in the days or months after the attacks. 582.
Right.
And then years later died of a variety of causes that they or their families or their doctors suspected were linked to toxic smoke and ash.
Now, is that only certified diseases through the CDC, or were those, because that number seems really low to me, because there are a lot of people who've passed on through certain cancers that have come up that aren't certified by the CDC as of this moment, but could be in the future.
Right. Well, no, there is space for more names.
Oh, because we know that there are going to be many more people added. Yeah. Because look, there are thousands of people who right now are getting treatments through the CDC program for the World Trade Center health program as part of the Zadroga Act of 2010.
Right.
And
right.
Look, that list is going to be even longer and more encompassing than the people who died initially.
Exactly. There are going to be more people, no question. And this isn't the only memorial. There are other memorials recognizing people who fell ill after participating in the rescue and recovery
operation. I'm all in favor of memorials to a certain degree, as long as they come with the look. I know it's a nice act, but it's got to come with the backing of making sure that we take care of the people who were affected by this. And what's frustrating to me is it took so long to get that Zadroga Act passed through. And to keep it funded, and to make sure that people are cared for. That's one of the things that frustrates me. We easily throw up a monument because it doesn't cost much. It's that long-term commitment that's more important to me.
It is, and it was very difficult. I mean, I remember the role that Jon Stewart had to play.
Yeah.
which was basically name and shame. I mean, it was a variety of that, if you like. It wasn't quite name and shame, but it was basically shame and shame.
Exactly, and that's just sad.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah, but do you remember where you were on 9/11?
Oh, I do. I was a radio talk show host on WMAL here in Washington, D.C. I did a show later in the day, so I was asleep, and my program director called and woke me up just after 9 o'clock and in the morning, and so then I was up, and and then it was all coverage all day long. Where were you?
I was in the Cleveland Clinic. My grandmother was having surgery. And I remember that night leaving the clinic and driving back on fumes because I had driven from Pennsylvania, where I lived, to Cleveland for the surgery, and said, I'll get gas after the surgery. Gas was $9 a gallon when I left the Cleveland Clinic.
Really?
Good capitalists. And then the next day, of course, the mayor came out and said, if you're going to refund all of that or we're coming after you. And then it all went back to some bit of sanity. But I'll never forget that. The initial response from the good capitalist gas station owners was $9 a gallon.
Wow.
Yeah, it was. But again, I think back to that day, and I remember waking up that morning, and I remember the feeling of this is life is good, and then the world all changed that morning.
So much changed, and it was just bizarre. And I remember driving in this area, and it was so quiet and of course Pentagon got hit. It was so quiet. There was nothing on the street, of course, nothing in the air, and no way of traveling to New York or anywhere. And my producer for my radio talk show, she was American, but she was from Iran, and she had to drive in and around the Beltway. I said, how are you going to do it, actually? Because you look foreign. I don't want you stopped by the police. You may never get here.
And
you're going to be the only one on the Beltway.
Yeah. No, I mean, very interesting thought. I mean, and I don't think we as a country were thinking that way at that moment.
Yeah. But she came in and she made it. I mean, it was amazing. It was just bizarre.
Yeah, and I remember, a couple years after that, I'd had you on the program, and when we were doing nights, and you had said, now, when all of this stuff, with all the surveillance and all the bag checks and all of the, take your belt off at the airport stuff, you had said, hey, where I lived for years, that was normal standard operating procedure.
Yeah, it was because of the Irish attacks. And I remember in 2011, later that year, we had the Beltway sniper.
Yeah.
That was also eerie.
Crazy world we live in, Victoria.
Yeah.
Is it frustrating? I appreciate the time. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
Victoria Jones, Talk Media News. Quick break. Right back.
Radio of, for, and by we the working people. The Rick Smith Show.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a diversified media enterprises production.
For WIN, I'm Joanne Powers. Home health care workers have filed a class action lawsuit against the state of Illinois, demanding the administration of Republican Governor Bruce Rauner pay them a 48-cent per hour raise that state legislators included in the recent state budget. These home care providers, primarily women of color, care for people with disabilities for an average hourly wage of $13 an hour, mostly for jobs far less than 40 hours a week. SEIU Healthcare Illinois Communications Director James Mohammed.
Governor Rauner is obligated to pay the 48-cent raise. These workers do a lot of hard work and save the state a lot of money. We don't understand what the governor's resistance to this is. As a matter of fact, we feel that he should come to the bargaining table ready to offer a little more in light of what these workers save for the state and what they do for the people they care for.
Ironically, the Rauner administration is claiming that the raise needs to be negotiated as part of the workers' collective bargaining agreement.
We've been in bargaining for 2 years. They've offered no real proposals that really allow workers a path forward. We've come to the table time after time, ready to make some progress on the negotiations. However, time after time, they tend to come either unprepared or unprepared to do anything. We contend that it's part of the state budget. It should be paid. That's why we filed the lawsuit.
Collective worker action has led to a victory for non-unionized workers at a Target store in Christiansburg, Virginia. After years of trying to have General Manager Daniel Butler removed through official channels for sexual harassment and racist remarks, a small group of workers mounted a 5-day strike at the end of August, presenting testimony to the corporation and the public to hold Butler accountable. On Friday, they received word that Butler had been fired. Adam, a Target worker and member of the Independent Workers Committee at the store, says this doesn't end with Butler, as they are still fighting for improved working conditions, such as a living wage and health coverage.
We wanted to show through this to the other coworkers that you can exercise your labor rights, you can go on strike and still retain your job and not get fired. In the lead up to this, we talked to workers a lot, trying to get them more involved, and a lot of the common responses was just this fear that they would get fired if they participated in this. Concerted activity is protected whether you're in a union or not to take collective action around given issues. We don't need official recognition. I think we showed even with very small amount of numbers, you actually can have a significant impact if you're well organized and have a good strategy.
Workers Independent News is America's multimedia voice for workers.
We need to make more money. What they're paying us, a greedy corporation, they just want to pay us what they want to pay us, and it's not right.
Support WIN's news mission at workersindependentnews.com. WIN is made possible in part by the OPEIU, the Office and Professional Employees International Union. You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit workersindependentnews.com.
Show. Check out the website, ricksmithshow.com. So in my home state of Pennsylvania, Republicans, again, like they do all across the country, looking for gimmicks, looking for tricks, looking for ways to, destroy the commons, go after education, privatize, all of that stuff. But it's the smoke and mirrors. We can't raise taxes on the wealthy and corporations. Can't do that. No, in fact, they need more tax cuts. In fact, we're seeing it coming out of Donald Trump right now in the face of us as a nation having to spend billions to rebuild Houston and Florida. Still talking about more tax breaks, more tax cuts. And how do you pay for it? Well, at least in my home state of Pennsylvania, it looks like let's go after the schools. Let's go after and take whatever reserves they've got, whatever rainy day funds. Let's rob those and impose more cuts. Because to them, the only way we balance budgets is through pain, cuts through the bone, and suffering. Here to talk a little bit about the latest gimmicks and what's going on. I've asked Wyth Keither to come talk with us. He's Assistant Communications Director there with the Pennsylvania State Education Association. Wyth, thanks for taking time for us.
Good morning, Rick.
So am I getting this right? Are we seeing another one of these gimmicky tricks? We're going to rob the state coffers, the school coffers? Is that what we're doing?
Well, for all your listeners who were watching the hurricane forecasting was of a slow-moving natural disaster, and what we're seeing in Harrisburg is a slow-moving man-made disaster. Now, Pennsylvania's General Assembly had a spending plan approved back during the summer.
Right.
But the Republicans in the House have balked, and they've been out of session for the last 7 weeks. They finally came back into session this morning, but there are deadlocked on spending they've already approved.
Good at spending money. It's paying for things. It's tough.
now is whether there's going to be all of the services that go to public schools, but 2.2 billion hole in the state budget. Now the Republican Harrisburg that basically was a piggy bank smashing strategy. They were going to identify all these special funds, restricted funds that were set aside for specific purposes, and they were going to pay all those funds in an effort to pay. The that is proposed to draw on funds which legally they can't even access because they're statutorily set. Some examples are medical assistance and corrections and the state's contribution to the pension funds. So they overestimated how many piggy banks they had and how much they could raise by smashing those piggy banks. And the bottom line is they need to abandon the gimmicks and come up with a real solution that's reality-based.
Wow, I mean, are we really in this state, in my home state, are we really this dysfunctional? I mean, it sounds like a crack addict at a 3 a.m. binge trying to find, pennies in the sofa cushions. Look, we want education. There are things that we have to have. How difficult is it to come up with the idea that, you know what, we've spent the money and they passed the spending bill, now figure out how to pay for it and be big boys and girls and do what has to be done?
Well, it does seem like there's a different type of reality distortion zone that's hovering over the state capitol right now. But a number of state agencies and people who work in public schools have tried to explain to these legislators that you can't just go into all these restricted accounts in the state budget to achieve to make up $2.2 billion. And if the answer doesn't come within the next few days, the slow-moving man-made disaster I described is going to happen. The state treasurer, Joe Trusella, has said the state simply cannot borrow any more money. And what's going to happen is that Governor Tom Wolf, who's trying to do the best he can, will have to start freezing funds. And among those funds that could be frozen would be our K-12 public schools and appropriations to our state universities, including Pitt, Penn State, Temple, and Lincoln universities. So the man-made disaster will be here. And every day of inaction is a day closer to repeating the fiasco we had in 2011 when the former governor, Tom Corbett, cut nearly $1 billion out of public school funding. And so we don't want to see that scenario repeat itself.
Yeah, no one. And you talk to school superintendents across the state and school board presidents across the state. Universally, they don't want to see that as well. But here's the thing, and I hate to think that this is political. I want to give Republicans credit for having some bit of ideology, but it just kind of stinks to me of political opportunism. That there's an election coming up next year. The governor, like you said, is doing the best he can. There's part of me that just thinks that this is just rank opportunism by the Republicans to make the governor look bad and to use our children and to use our state operations and institutions as leverage points and hostages in that fight.
Well, I wouldn't describe it as rank opportunism, but certainly politics plays a factor. The members of the House Republican caucus have repeatedly said they won't support any kind of tax increase, not even a tax on the state's natural gas drillers who nation among all the other energy producing states. They've said they won't even consider that. No other broad-based tax in order to fund. As we get closer to the point where the state can't borrow, that Pennsylvania's 12 children will pay that price. And then we remember what happened 6 years ago when Governor Corbett cut funding to schools.
Yep.
School libraries closed. Class sizes were increased. Good teachers and good school support professionals lost their jobs. So in other words, children were paying the price, and no one wants to see that happen again. In fact, the people of Pennsylvania made it clear in the last gubernatorial election that Governor Corbett's cuts were unacceptable, and they voted him out of office.
Yeah, and voted in a guy who said he was going to pursue education funding. Let me ask you this, back to the piggy bank theory. Let's say they were able to smash all the piggy banks and take all of the money that's in reserves this year. One, would it be enough to cover the $2.1 billion structural deficit? And if we do that, next year, what gimmick will we come up with? What will we raid next year? Because understand, and I think as you've pointed out, this is a structural deficit. This just doesn't go away when you pay 1 year. It comes back next year, right?
You ask a good question, Rick, and the answer is no. That even if they were able to raid all the piggy banks, they've identified all these restricted accounts, all these special funds that are in the state budget. They would not be able to generate enough money to make up the hole in the budget. We think they've overestimated the amount of money they can gain, and we all think they've also misidentified some funds, but which are statutorily set in separate law and can't be changed and can't be cut through a general appropriations bill. So legally, they may not be able to do it. Even if they were able to raid all the piggy banks, as we've been talking about, that they've identified, it would just set us up for a bigger budget crisis in 2018. We'd be spreading insolvency, not just from the general fund of the budget, but throughout all these other special funds, which are there for a purpose and should be left alone.
No, I mean, because look, every institution has to have a rainy day fund where things that come up unexpected. I mean, everyone's got one, a little money squirreled away somewhere for just in case. And I think every institution should have that flexibility. But this idea just seems kind of dumb to me. But then again, no dumber than a lot of the past schemes that we've seen.
Well, several state agencies have tried to explain that the money in these restricted funds, these special funds that are set aside in the state budget, they've already been committed to future state projects and state funding. So there's no way to simply, as we've been talking about, smashing the piggy banks without setting up a similar but greater budget crisis in 2018.
Just mind-blowing. So last question I've got for you then, is what do we do? What do the taxpayers do? I mean, because look, nobody wants to pay more taxes. I get that. But at the end of the day, nobody wants to see their children, in 60-kid classrooms with no nurse or librarian or supports. What do we do?
Well, as we speak, there are advocates for public schools and a responsible state budget, advocates from both parties who are meeting in the Capitol Rotunda in Harrisburg, imploring the House Republicans to pass a reality-based revenue plan to fund this budget. And the key thing that we'd like all of your listeners to do right now, if they live in Pennsylvania, is to contact their state representatives and say, we want a responsible budget.
It's that simple. Call them early, call them often, but call them. I appreciate the time. I appreciate your input, and thanks for keeping us up to date.
Thanks for having me on, Rick.
Good stuff. Appreciate it. With Keever, Assistant Communications Director at the PSCA. Look, the reality is we want things. We want our kids to have opportunities. We want them to get K through 12 education. We want a state system of higher education. The stuff we want, you got to pay for it. And the sane and rational amongst us say there's a way to do it without causing mass chaos, mass pain and suffering. Just mind-blowing. Quick break, right back.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1851. That was the day that a Maryland planter named Edward Gorsuch was killed in Christiana, Pennsylvania. Gorsuch had come to Pennsylvania to try and recapture 3 black men that had escaped from slavery on his farm outside of Baltimore 2 years earlier. A year after the men escaped, Congress passed the Fugitive Slave Act. This penalized helping those who had escaped slavery with a $1,000 fine and up to 6 months in jail. Emboldened by the law, slave catchers chased those who had made the journey to freedom in the North. Gorsuch received news that the men he was looking for were in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. 2 of the escaped slaves were at the farm of William Parker, a black man who had also escaped slavery in Maryland. Located just north of the Mason-Dixon line, Lancaster had a well-established underground railroad network. An armed black self-defense group had developed to stand against the slave catchers. Gorsuch and his son gathered a group of men and headed north. At the Parker farm, they were confronted by a group of at least 50 black men armed with guns and pitchforks. Gorsuch refused to leave, and a gun battle erupted. Gorsuch was shot and killed in the exchange of fire. Parker, his family, and the 3 formerly enslaved men fled to Canada. 38 others who were there that day were charged with treason for taking part in the confrontation. This included Castor Hanway, a white man who had tried to defuse the standoff. None of the charged were ever convicted. In the South, slave owners were outraged that no one was punished. Tensions between the North and South sharpened. As a result, the country moved closer to the Civil War, the bloody conflict that finally ended slave labor. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at laborhistoryin2. This tax thing is not new. Look, the Republicans have been playing this tax game for a very long time. And I look at what's going on in Washington, D.C. right now. You've got Donald Trump, who over the weekend said, look, now's the time to go pushing forward, speed up tax reform. He said, I want to speed up. I want it sped up anyway. And now we need it even more. And you look, because of Irma, because of Harvey, because of all of this stuff, now's the time more than ever to hurry through their tax reform. And it got me thinking that I don't really think that Trump understands what the Republican tax scheme is going to be. There's part of me that thinks in his head, and maybe this is just giving him too much credit, but there's part of me that thinks that in his head, he really thinks that he's going to deliver real, honest-to-goodness, true middle-class tax reform. That he's going to make a system that is much easier and simpler for working people to navigate and pay much lower taxes so that they can spend, and from a business mentality. And again, maybe I'm giving too much credit here, but there's part of me that thinks that's what he's thinking. That there's a possibility that, you know what, we're gonna give a whole bunch of money to the working class of this country so that they can spend it. Because as a business person, he's got to know that a working class with disposable income goes to his crummy casinos. And they buy his crummy hats. And they buy all of the crap that he's thrown his name on. Because I would have to believe, because rich people aren't really stupid, but I would have to believe that there are very few in the 1% who've ever bought anything with Trump's name on it, other than a building or an apartment. None of the steaks, none of the vodka, none of the Trump University courses, none of the golf shirts, none of that none of the ties, none of that garbage. There's nobody in the 1% who bought that stuff. Those are working people who are going, I want to be like Donald. I want to try and be a billionaire. Let's take my hard-earned money and throw $40 down on a crummy hat because I want to be like Don. And what's interesting is the Republicans are kind of freaking out. Because if you looked at the weekend's kind of back and forth, the deal that Trump made with the Democrats, which again, as we talked about last week, was probably just one of those moments where he was tired and he just go, you know what, I want my ice cream now. I don't care. But you look at the fact that the administration is now saying that there may be some deals with the Democrats. Since the Republicans aren't getting anything done. They haven't put anything on his desk. He likes signing things. He likes playing with the pens, doing the clicky thing, He likes the attention. He likes the cameras. He likes the pomp, the circumstance, the ceremony. That's what he wants. He doesn't want to get involved in the sausage making. He simply wants to sign things and be loved. And if it means moving with Democrats, well, that might happen. Now, am I holding my breath? No. And I think Representative Richard Neal, the Democrat from Massachusetts, he's the top Democrat on the House Ways and Means Committee. I think he probably said it kind of best when he said basically lawmakers shouldn't get all worked up. They shouldn't read too much into what Trump's doing because he said, quote, there's a certain volatility at the White House where minds and moods change very swiftly. Does he mean that he's neurotic? Well, probably. But again, this wild swings. What kind of tax reform is this going to get us? Now, what the Republicans have come out and said they want is what they've always wanted. More tax breaks for the rich, more tax breaks for corporations. That's simple. We know that. But Trump has talked about, raising taxes on the wealthy. He's actually said that. There's none of that in the Republican plan. And again, he doesn't care what's in it. Does not care what's in the bill. Just wants to sign something. Doesn't want to be viewed as a loser. And right now he's being viewed as a loser. So if he can put his name on stuff, good, bad, indifferent, right now, all it means is that today I'm a winner. Could be horrible down the road. Don't care. I got my love and adoration right now. And I'll tell you, as you look at these schemes, and the Republicans know what they're doing. And I'm not saying that they're smart. I'm saying that the lobbyists hired by the very wealthy, they are really smart. They know exactly what they want. Let me ask you a dumb question, because I know the answer. But it's one of those questions that you go, how many working class people have lobbyists? When was the last time you consulted with your lobbyist about, I would like a child tax credit that's actually sufficient to help cover the cost of children? Lower my taxable rate so that I can put shoes on their feet, cereal in front of them in the morning, a roof over their head, maybe a backpack to walk to school with. When was the last time you consulted with your lobbyist? Oh, that's right, never? Because you don't have a lobbyist? Do you know who has lobbyists? Rich people. They do, because they got lots of money. And you know how they get more money? By hiring lobbyists. It's a pretty simple scenario. Isn't very difficult to figure out that if you have the resources to hire a lobbyist, that they will pursue your interests. How many working class people have the ability to pursue their interests on a full-time basis with their representatives, be it at the state level or the federal level? I would argue none. And again, I keep coming back to why I'm a big proponent of labor unions. One of those things is labor unions do lobby their representatives. Not as much as big corporations, but at least a little bit. And thus, middle class, working class issues get some bit of representation. Not a lot, but some. You look at the fact that, and I love this about Canada, and we talked about this last week, Canadian labor leaders are lobbying their government to push in the NAFTA renegotiations an end to American right-to-work laws. Because they're saying, under the concept of harming their economy, that right-to-work laws are harming their jobs. That's what's happening is a giant sucking sound. And I don't know if there's a Canadian equivalent to Ross Perot, but there's a giant sucking sound in Canada right now. And all of those jobs that are on the Canadian border are moving south into the Canadian version of Mexico called the U.S. So Michigan, Wisconsin are sucking jobs out of Canada and lowering wages. And eventually we know how this plays out. The giant sucking sound keeps going south. It's the Southern strategy, if you will, where you have cheap, exploitable labor, and the further south you go, the more cheap and the more exploitable they are. How can you have and again, if you remember NAFTA, and I do really, really well, I was told that it was going to raise all boats. We were going to raise the wages of the Mexican workers, and it was going to be great for everyone because they would be able to consume more of our made products, and it would be all great. And those of us who were alive then and who were cognizant of reality and in touch with a bit of reality were going, wait a second. That makes no sense whatsoever. What's going to happen is, well, we're all going to lose jobs to Mexico, and there'll be a great leveling off maybe to where Mexican wages come up a little bit, but American wages go way the hell down. Well, the worst of that scenario actually happened. American wages have gone way the hell down, but Mexican wages have dropped as well. They've got lots of jobs, but they don't pay what they paid in the U.S. And why is that? Well, you could argue that Mexico has company unions like we've outlawed in this country, which we're complaining about to this day, which is ironic that our negotiators are saying, you, Mexico, with your company illegal unions, that's bad. You should be like us and break unions with the law. And you got Canada going, wait a second. About a third of our workforce is unionized. Why are we doing business with a country that, well, in the private sector anyway, 6.4%? Why are we doing business with a desperate country? That's what policymakers have done to us. And it's scary, scary stuff. Going to take a quick break. When we come back, a little bit more of the labor news with our good friend Frank Emspec, Workers Independent News. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
10% of the people own 90% of the wealth. Where do you fit in? Take a look at yourself. 10% of the people own 90% of the wealth.
Where smart policy and sound investment matters. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. Today in Labor History, we pause to remember the events that took place on the morning of September 11th. The year was 2001. Terrorists hijacked planes and intentionally crashed them into the Twin Towers in New York City and the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. Nearly 3,000 people were killed in the attack, including 634 union members. They were members of the fire and police unions that had responded to help those at the scene of the attack. They were also pilots and flight attendants on the crashed planes. 343 firefighters died on that day. It was the deadliest firefighter disaster in U.S. history. Before September 11th, the greatest loss of firefighters in an urban building collapse fire occurred in Chicago in 1910. 21 firefighters were killed while fighting a fire in the stockyards. 11 years after the September 11th attack, Harold Schattenberger of the International Association of Firefighters recalled their sacrifice. At the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, our members gave everything they had. The best that this union and this nation have to offer was demonstrated in their courageous response. In the aftermath of September 11th, the Firefighters Union worked to improve benefits and protections for their members and their families. In particular, the Uniformed Firefighters Association Local 94 and Uniformed Fire Officers Association Local 854 lobbied Washington officials on these issues. In 2010, President Barack Obama signed the James Zagrota 9/11 Health and Compensation Act into law. The act was named after a police officer who developed a fatal respiratory disease while working at recovery efforts at Ground Zero. The act provided medical monitoring and treatment to World Trade Center responders. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com. I'm Rick Smith, and this...
Donald Trump loves it when crowds at his raucous right-wing rallies stand and chant in red-faced fury, "Build that wall! Build that wall!" So he keeps fanning their fire by repeatedly promising to wall off Mexico with a multi-billion-dollar, quote, "big, beautiful barrier on the border." "We must have the wall," he tweeted in late August, promising again that, quote, Mexico will pay for it. The problem with his bombastic promises, however, is that they turn out to be duds. Even Trump knows that building that wall is nothing but PR Trumpery. In a phone call to President Peña Nieto, he admitted that Mexico actually was not going to pay a single peso for the offensive border partition, but he begged his cross-border counterpart to stop saying so publicly, for Mexico's adamant refusal to pay was exposing Trump, the deal-maker, as a weakling. Still, he loudly threatened again on August 21st to close down our government if Congress doesn't pony up billions to fund his pet project. But just 4 days later, reality intervened when a mass migration poured across the U.S. border. Not a migration of Mexicans, but of floodwaters from the Gulf of Mexico. Hurricane Harvey's biblical level of destruction not only swamped cities and communities all along the Texas-Louisiana coastline, but it has also swamped Congress with a tsunami of demands from GOP state officials for as much as $180 billion in federal relief, not counting Hurricane Irma. This is Jim Hightower saying, ironically, Trump and his gang of anti-big government congressional zealots were about to cut nearly $1 billion from the federal disaster aid budget when Harvey hit the coast. Now, they're scrambling to add multiple billions of dollars to that budget just to rebuild what Harvey destroyed. Where to get the money? Start by zeroing out every dime that would be frittered away on Donald's folly.
Hightower's commentaries are brought to you by the Hightower Lowdown, the monthly newsletter with Hightower's take on what Wall Street and Washington are up to. For information, visit hightowerlowdown.org.
On now, it's back to the voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
I got 800 miles of open border right outside my door. There's Minutemen and little pickup trucks who've declared their own dang war. Now the government wants to build a barrier like old Berlin, 8 feet tall. But if Uncle Sam sends the illegals home, who's gonna build the wall? Who's gonna build your wall, boys? Who's gonna mow your lawn? Who's gonna cook your Mexican food when your Mexican maid is gone? Who's gonna wax the floors tonight?
So Pope Francis was on a flight back to Rome from Colombia, and he said that President Trump's plan to end DACA is, quote, not pro-life. He says, quote, if he is a good pro-life man, then he will understand that the family is the cradle of life and that it must be defended as a unit. He also spoke about climate change after the hurricanes and said the scientists speak very clearly. Which, again, these storms are huge and getting bigger. It seems these 500 and 1,000-year storms, well, they seem to be coming a little more often. Anyway, let's find out what's going on in the world of labor news. Frank Emspeck, executive producer there at the Workers Independent News. Frank, thanks for taking time for us.
Hi, it's good to hear from you.
So what do you think of all this that's going on down in Florida and in Texas?
Well, it's a good thing that the climate deniers are still working. Maybe the next thing will happen is look into the ocean, and then they'll realize that it's happening. I think, of course, it's terrible that what we're seeing here is really a huge bill, a huge destruction, and most of it's going to fall on working people. And it comes from, basically saying we can do anything we want. The real estate developers will build if we feel like it. And basically what it means is that low-income people wind up in the flood zone. And as people will discover, their flood insurance, A, doesn't exist in 80% of the cases, and B, even if it does, is mostly in the form of a loan. And finally, that has to be paid back. And the kind of actual grants that are available, according to the papers, don't cover most of the cost of housing. So you have that. And then you have what is obvious to everybody, apparently, even President Trump at this stage of the game, although we're not sure about that yet, that the thing that's going to be possible, the only thing that's possible in Florida and in Texas for rebuilding is going to be just as it was in Louisiana, namely the dependence upon undocumented workers to do a large part of the work. And that gets us to the question of who is driving down wages, the Republicans or the workers. And I think our position is quite clear about that. When you pass federal legislation, as they have, that eliminates Davis-Bacon or eliminates or cuts back on the ability to put a floor under wages, what you're doing then is using public money to drive down wages, and that's the Republican strategy here. So all these things come together. I know that sounds obscure, but let me be clear. The reason that the Republicans in 1935, everybody remembers this, right, passed Davis-Bacon, which was a law that said if you are going to have federal funding for projects or others, you have to pay the prevailing wage, so that a company would then have to compete based on quality and deliverables, not on cutting wages.
Yep.
If you do anything else, what you're really doing is subsidizing firms to cut wages. And so what we're seeing here is all of this heart-rending stuff, and it is terrible. It is terrible about what's going on in Texas and Florida. And all of a sudden, the very Congress people who voted against aid for Hurricane Sandy in New York, oh my God, well, help us out, my goodness, we're in trouble, it's just the people that count, blah, blah. Well, luckily, and I think to their credit, Democratic congressmen in New York and elsewhere who were really attacked by these people from the South are now voting for money for the hurricane. That's good. But the administration needs to come out with a real serious statement that says something like this: we're not going to allow federal money to drive wages.
Right.
And
we're not going to do what George.
We're
not going to do what W did during Katrina and suspend Davis-Bacon and the Fair Labor Standards Act and end up paying people $1 an hour.
Well, I think that's the. I think that's so terrible. Okay, and I think that it's true that labor has stepped up. Labor has made it very clear. President Trump and others and every single major construction union is saying we're doing whatever we can to provide skilled workers in these areas, But the way to deal with it is not to then bash people in the head. So that's one whole thing. The second thing, it seems to me, is that we're asking the American taxpayer to pay flood insurance for people who shouldn't, particularly on the coast where it's the wealthiest enclaves, where people shouldn't be building in the first place. And one of the things that happened in New York City was that there was some realization that some places were simply not going to be rebuilt. And I hope that happens in Texas and Florida, because otherwise we're going to wind up paying all this money out again for years, if not sooner. And so there's got to be some realization here that there is a change. Now, I don't know whether the people are going to embrace the fact that there is climate change or just pretend it isn't. But on a basic insurance question like this, and whether or not these cities should take on the whole idea of housing and some kind of progressive thing, I think that's what has to be pushed by progressive people and labor people at this point.
I'm right there with you. And for me, I just asked this earlier in the show. Why do we still have trailer parks in Florida? Why aren't we building these structures to last through the things that we know are coming?
Well, it's a very interesting thing you raised, because I read an article from 1876. Now, I know that's a long time ago, and most of our listeners were probably not alive then, right? I would assume. But it was an article by Frederick Engels, in Marx and Engels, and he was writing about the housing crisis in London and the inability of the ruling classes in London to provide housing for working people. And here we are, 150 years later, it's the same problem. The system cannot provide decent housing. And so you're in trailer parks, or you're in substandard houses, you're building on a floodplain or whatever. And this is a real fundamental issue. And I really believe that at this point in our country, it's time for progressive people, for working people, for the labor movement to say, hey, what's happening here is unacceptable and insupportable. Let me just give you one example of insupportable, okay? If I can do that. The Wall Street Journal, of all things, on September 6th, came out with a little article called The Big Shift at Work. And it says that although workers, of course, where they're working, still get paid, that share is shrinking as companies spend less on employee compensation and business investment, in other words, a non-investment. Guess what? More on profits. So the percentage of money going to profits has increased 3 times, 300%. And what that means is that there's no investment or little investment, no forethought. And this is shareholder profit, right? Money to stockholders. Not investment, not looking forward, not planning, certainly not investment in science and technology and the things that you need for a successful country. So that's this business in Florida and in Texas cannot be separated from the overall direction of where these companies are going, in my opinion.
Yeah. One of the things
I know
that
that's a lot to put together, but you're talking about fundamental, basic investment here in infrastructure and in housing, and instead the money is being sucked out and given to shareholders. And
again, at the expense of everyone else.
Sure.
And the hope is that eventually we wake up to this reality and push for it.
Well, I mean, that's what income inequality means. Wealth inequality means money is taken from someplace and given somewhere else in a country where productivity, that is what people produce per hour, has gone up. And the share of wealth to people has gone down. It isn't the Mexicans. It isn't the people in China. It's the folks who are running these industries right here who are the driver for these policies.
And again, it comes back to we've been duped again, and at some point, the hope is that we wake up and start pointing in the right direction. And you look at what this cleanup effort is going to bring. It's going to bring lots of money for these corporations, but will it have the reverberation effect in the local economy? That's yet to be seen.
That's right. We will not know. And I think that what is so scary here is that there does not seem to be any realization or willingness on the part of the Trump people to even recognize this, as opposed to leading a charge to cut wages.
Right, but here's the thing,
I think we always have to say that, because I don't think it's so clear how these deals work. But you cut wages, just like with DACA. You take 800,000 people and you say you're no longer protected by anything. What does that mean? It means that anybody who's in trouble on a wage issue is not going to do anything, right? They'll get deported. So you're going to see what amounts to an attack on the lowest wage sector of the population by this business with the Trump administration. Aside from being reprehensible, morally disgusting, and completely unrepresentative of what any decent person really wants.
No, I agree with you, but here's the thing. I mean, what you're talking about is, great big ideas. Talking about housing, talking about, propping up wages. But we live in a country right now where, and I don't know if you saw this coming out of Jacksonville, Florida. There was a Pizza Hut in Jacksonville posted a memo on the wall for their employees to see, saying if you don't show up your regular shift up until we say it's okay for you to leave to evacuate, you're going to lose your job. You're going to be fired. We can't even stop that from happening, let alone all of the wonderful things that I think we need to be doing that you've pointed out.
Well, there was a slogan in New York in the 1910s, 1915s. If you don't come on Saturday, don't come on Monday, because people were working 6 days a week then. And here you have immigrants and 5 or 10 different languages being spoken in each one of these little garment shops. And they figured out that that was unacceptable. And they fought against it. And I think we're seeing the same thing. You saw it on Labor Day with people Fight for 15 and a union. You've seen some advances made in the airports where people have stuck together and raised the wages. You saw that in Seattle. You saw it, I think, in Chicago. I believe you'll see it in Newark as well, where people have stuck together and said, this is unacceptable. And it is unacceptable. And maybe the good people of the city will stand up and say, this is unacceptable. But that's what it's going to take. And I believe we're seeing that bit by bit. This is not a total slam dunk for people attacking workers this year. What is happening, I think, is they're sharpening of what's going on. And so people are saying, Republicans say, we're for small government. But incidentally, we're passing a state law that says no municipality can raise wages. How does that work? You know, and I think people think, what? And now more and more people are saying, no. And you can see that in the poll results from the president. You can see that now in the fact that the Republicans in charge realize that if they cut 22 million people out of the healthcare system, they wouldn't be in charge anymore. And I think that's, again, because of grassroots activity. I met with some people in Boston on Thursday.
Okay, he met with somebody in Boston on Thursday. I think we lost him. No, but the reality is if we can't do the simple things, like keeping people, employed, there's a problem. And while I would love to do all of the things that Frank said, the reality is we're struggling with the simple stuff. And he's right. What we need is much more militant working force. We need more people in the streets, more people in their communities. The sad thing and the thing that bothers me is, the court system is being stacked against us. And again, it all comes back to politics. It all comes back to who did you cast your vote for in the last election? And, maybe going back to those days like my grandfather's generation, who you voted on your paycheck. You voted kitchen table economic issues. And I think the Democrats have long forgotten that. The hope is before 2018, they figure it out again. Because the sad reality is they have not been the party of the working class for a very long time. That, to me, is the message for them. Frank, I appreciate it. I'm not sure what happened to his phone. Again, lack of investment. Quick break. Right back to wrap things up. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Fighting till the end. And we're not gonna break tonight, and we're not gonna bend. Some say the union's down, but I asked around, and everybody said, this is a union town, all down the line. This is a union town, all down the line. And if they come to strip our rights away, we'll give them hell every time. This is a union town, all down the line.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 2001. We pause to remember those who died in the 9/11 attacks. Of those killed, nearly a quarter were union people. Hundreds of firefighters were lost, dozens of building tradespeople, and many other unions lost members as well, including the AFT, SEIU, Unite Here, CWA, and AFSCME. Those lost that day will remain firmly forever in our memories. What is less well known is the number of those first responders who are suffering from chronic and fatal diseases related to 9/11 or those who have already died. It is estimated that over 400,000 people were exposed to World Trade Center contaminants. These include more than 70 carcinogens and other hazardous substances. Of those exposed, over 91,000 were first responders. As of June 2017, over 67,000 first responders and over 12,000 survivors had registered in the World Trade Center Health Program run by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The program provides medical monitoring, health evaluations, and treatment for those who qualify. Of those registered responders still alive, more than 45,000 suffer from certified conditions as defined by the Zadroga Act of 2010. And for registered survivors, nearly 10,000 suffer from certified conditions. Close to 700 registered first responders have already died from certified conditions. However, this number is considered a low estimate given that there were many who died before the program was established. There are also a number of illnesses believed related to the attacks but not yet certified. If you are a survivor or were a 9/11 first responder and would like to enroll in the World Trade Center Health Program, please visit cdc.gov/WTC or call toll-free 1-888-982-4748.
From San Francisco, California, this is your World in 2 Minutes. I'm your host, Luke Vargas, for Talk Media News. When Nobel Peace Prize winners start to turn on one another, you know things are bad. That's what's happening this week amid escalating reports of ethnic cleansing in the Asian nation of Myanmar, as the Buddhist government, led by former political prisoner and former Peace Prize winner Aung San Suu Kyi, appears to be standing by as Rohingya Muslims are persecuted, denied citizenship, and freedom of movement. According to recent estimates, more than 250,000 Rohingya have been displaced in just the last 2 weeks. The Nobel laureate Desmond Tutu couldn't help but lambaste Aung San Suu Kyi for her political leadership on Thursday, taking to Facebook to write that he is now, quote, elderly, decrepit, and formally retired, but breaking my vow to remain silent on public affairs out of profound sadness. Tutu recalled having a photo of Suu Kyi on his desk during her imprisonment and rejoicing when she became Myanmar's leader several years ago. But he went on to say that, quote, my dear sister, if the political price of your ascension to the highest office in Myanmar is your silence, the price is surely too steep. In recent days, Suu Kyi has refused to condemn military operations led by the country's military against the Rohingya, and she's called out the news media for spreading misinformation about the Rohingya crisis.
Ya explotaron dos transformadores, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
And that counting in Spanish you hear is a man watching as power transformers blow out across Mexico City during a magnitude 8.2 earthquake that hit the country late on Thursday. The epicenter of what's being described as the strongest quake to hit Mexico in more than a century was located off of Mexico's southern coast, near the states of Chiapas and Oaxaca, where dozens of death and widespread damage has already been reported. For more global news headlines, visit TalkMediaNews.com.
Making the blue blood see red. The Rick Smith Show.
Back to the Rick Smith Show. No, seriously, you look at this Pizza Hut in Jacksonville, Florida, and it was all over Twitter. Someone took a photo of it and said, look, and it reads to all team members as Hurricane Irma approaches Florida, I want to send this note. Our number one priority is the safety and security of our team. But we also have a responsibility and commitment to our community to be there when they need us. Because, yes, we're going to be delivering pizzas during a hurricane. It says, with that said, we need some guidelines in place to ensure both those expectations are met. Point 1, as a general rule of thumb, we close stores 6 to 12 hours before a storm hits or night before if a daytime storm. So, 6 hours. You got 6 hours to get out. Let RGM know, and I guess that's the name of the company, if you plan to evacuate and when you plan to return after the storm. Well, look, I got to imagine if you're working at Pizza Hut that you don't have a lot of resources to go, hey, I can guarantee when I'm coming and going, and yeah, I know exactly where I'm going and when I'll be back. It's got to be one of those scenarios where, it might be up in the air, where, you don't know where you're going to end up. I mean, it's just nuts. It goes on to say, if evacuating, you will have a 24-hour period before the storm, grace period to not be scheduled. You cannot evacuate Friday for a Tuesday storm event. Well, what happens if that's the only way you can get out? Failure to show for these shifts, regardless of reason, will be considered no call, no show, and documentation will be issued, which means you'll be fired. Please prepare now. We have plenty of time to prepare. Do not wait until the day before the storm to get supplies. You need to make sure you are ready now. Well, and do that while you're working. Expectations is that all TMs work their schedules until storm-related store closure, unless evacuating 24-hour period will be given. In the event of an evacuation, you must return within 72 hours. Yeah, there is that. Now, again, to me, another one of those reasons why you go, you need to have a union contract in place. But good on Pizza Hut in Florida. Good on them, right? Now you go, why doesn't the law protect us? Why doesn't the law protect us from what we know is coming? This kind of insanity. Because you've got all these Republicans who really are truly at their core anti-worker. And the thing is they're really good at saying, no, we love working people. They're the people who make us our profits. We just don't want to share with you. We don't want you to have a voice. We don't want you to have protection. And it's one of those moments where it's just mind-blowing to me. As someone who's been very fortunate over my working life to always have had a good union job with the ability to say, look, something came up. I'm going to take care of this me first. My family comes first. Sadly, a lot of people in this example from Pizza Hut, and trust me, they're not the only one. This example just kind of highlights the fact that what we've allowed to happen all around us in this country. The fact that we've got a union density rate around 11% total, a little over 6% in the private sector, is completely ridiculous. When you looked at the country to the north of us, they're about a third, about 33, 32% of their workforce is unionized. And we're actually dragging them down. It's one of those just, amazing things. We like to point to Mexico as the reason why wages are falling, while jobs are being lost. Well, they're doing the same thing to us. Instead of having a policy that raises us all up, what we've done is we've given into the corporate masters. And it's really just a sad, sad statement. And we, as a country, chose Donald Trump to be the one who supposedly is going to be our savior. Sad stuff. Anyway, if you missed any of today's program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you go to get the podcast, the Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you're going. As always, you can email me, Rick, at thericksmithshow.com. Thanks so much for tuning in. Back tomorrow.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Together, we can make America better. Email Rick at thericksmithshow.com or interact with us anytime at thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.